I want to ask Mason and Adam, why is DEI good? And I'm assuming you feel like there's been too much crackdown on DEI. There's a lot of scrutiny on it. What do you feel is the benefit to DEI for the country?
I think in a perfect world, we don't need to have any programs that highlight people's social identities, right? Because in a meritocracy, you just want people who are the most successful and people who are the most qualified, right? That is not something that is in contention, even within DEI programs themselves. The right likes to create this boogeyman of a government bureaucrat choosing somebody of a specific social identity or racial background over somebody that's completely qualified for a position. And that's just not true in the slightest. That at best, with affirmative action programs, you'll have two people that have similar backgrounds and similar qualifications, and there will be a decision to choose somebody that comes from a different perspective or a different cultural background in order to bring about a better understanding for the organization or for the company in general. That's something that most CEOs have said. I'm not the big CEO guy. I don't know why I'm advocating on their behalf, but I would say that Luke and Micah would say they make pretty good decisions when it comes to how businesses are able to operate. And if you bring in people from different backgrounds or different perspectives, you can say that that increases the vision of the organization. Why would I go into a strategic planning meeting without all of the ideas that I can get from different people of different backgrounds? So for me, it's a boogeyman. Like, I don't think that people are going to succeed any less without DEI programs. But I think that it's not something that should be as sensationalized as it is by people who are just pretty insecure about their own place within an organization.
And I just want to pitch in real quick, or do you want to let them go first?
No, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So like when we talk about DEI, it's a little frustrating because it seems like everyone defines it in the way that's like politically expedient for them to define it. So like, for example, when Trump talked about DEI and like the FAA with air traffic control causing the crash, this is a quote from air traffic control. When they implemented this diversity program, the agency emphasized as it rolled out the initiative that candidates would receive the same rigorous consideration in terms of aptitude, medical, and security qualifications as those individuals considered for a standard public opening. What they changed is they basically expanded the applicant pool to include people who, number one, did not have access to extracurriculars growing up, and who, number two, are not making money until later on in life. So they're not lowering standards as much as they're trying to diversify the applicant pool. When it comes to things like affirmative action, maybe Mason will disagree with me, and this is kind of like maybe a hot take of mine as someone on the left. I do think that the Supreme Court correctly decided the affirmative action case. So like if we're talking about, taking race into account in that way, I think that's probably not a good idea. But I think DEI is often, sort of like misrepresented as being like, we're just going to pick the blind guy and put him on lookout duty or something. Like that's not what's really happening. They're trying to expand the applicant pool and bring people into the fold who are not typically part of the fold. And that does not have to mean that you're lowering standards. If you are lowering standards, sure, I think that's bad. But I think that's not usually what's happening here.
Micah and Luke, where do you disagree with that? What Mason and Adam just said about DEI and why DEI is not so bad at all, because it's meant to just bring in people who otherwise wouldn't be considered. It's not dismantling meritocracy. I mean, is that how you see it, Micah and Luke?
I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I'll go ahead. Yeah, I think the way practically it plays out is that it does end up prioritizing people just solely based off of sexual characteristics or race characteristics. And so even if there are things that are saying, we're going to, look at everyone fairly based off of merit, what it actually ends up doing is enabling people to choose based off of exactly. Not anything that is good. That it's not based off of like, hey, are you actually good at this job? Are you qualified or anything like that? But instead, it's based off of characteristics they can't change about themselves.
Can you point to sectors where that's happening, Micah, where people who are unqualified for a position are being chosen based on racial identity?
You had the executive order that Trump released where, he banned all these DEI programs from government. Those would be specific government programs where that is happening.
Can you point to one?
Yeah. What's the, is it FFA?
FAA?
Or FAA, sorry. The FAA specifically had a staffing problem because of DEI.
That's just not true. And I already read from the FAA that they did not change hiring standards for this. You can make the argument that you think they're lying or something. The way this thing works is if you apply for a job at air traffic control, There's a certain threshold you have to meet to even be considered for the job in the first place. And then if out of that pool of applicants, they're looking for diversity, I don't think that's the same thing as lowering standards, because they're not just going to pick some random, disabled person or person of color. There's still certain boxes you have to check to get these jobs. And again,
do you think that these people are not going to like flight school in order to pilot a plane? Like they're just like a black guy and Biden is like, hell yeah, like we just need more black pilots. I don't care if they fly planes. Like, is that really what's happening in your mind, Micah?
No, but the emphasis doesn't become on merit. It now becomes based off of something else.
So two people
that they
pass
can't
a
change
flight
about
school.
themselves.
You're saying one gets like D's, but they're black, so they're going to get hired. I'm just trying to walk through the formula of what's going on here.
I'm saying, yeah, that's certainly possible.
Okay.
Underneath these programs.
Good to know.
I mean, I'll touch a little bit specifically with the FAA and their air traffic control hirees. I mean, they had a push to hire air traffic control individuals that literally had mental disabilities and had psychiatric disabilities. This is a job that, if you look at the definition and one of the requirements of an air traffic controller, it literally says you have to have a multitask mentality. If somebody is coming in because, they're getting picked and they have a mental disability, they probably should not be getting hired for this job. And it's really interesting that during the Biden administration, we saw an immense influx of individuals that were hired to be air traffic controllers that have these mental disabilities. And we're also seeing lawsuits currently of individuals that were not only met the requirements, but frankly were probably overqualified, that are suing the government because they got denied over somebody with a mental disability. If somebody...
So just to add some actual evidence to this conversation, what you're talking about, Luke, is that New York Post article that Trump read directly from, saying that there were severe intellectual disabilities or psychiatric problems for people that were being hired.
I'm not talking about
What's
that.
funny is the Trump era FAA had the exact same language on their website before Biden even took office. The FAA's language encouraging the hiring of people with disabilities, including psychiatric ones. Like, how are you going to have that within your own administration and then point the finger to somebody who succeeds you, who just adopts the exact same policies? If there should be any blame, shouldn't it be the Trump administration for creating these in the first place?
If that's the case, then yeah. Somebody with a mental disability should not be in a job that literally is deemed
This is very vague, though, because if
mentality.
someone applies and they're super qualified, and let's say like they had a history of depression or something, should they be like prevented from getting that job if they can still do the work perfectly fine? Like, how are we defining mental disability here? The way Trump described it again is like they picked some dude with no arms and they're like, your job is to push this button. I'm pretty sure if there's qualifications that have to be met to do these jobs, they're going to be met. They're not just going to arbitrarily throw people in there.
I would argue against that.
Micah,
Yeah.
do you have thoughts on this?
Well, if someone maybe is missing a hand or something, they shouldn't be doing it.
That was a good one, Micah.
Oh, thank you.
Hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at, again, the FAA, and you can see that they had a specific goal, and their goal was to diversify its workforce by quote rethinking its hiring practices, specifically in regards to DEI. And this was the criticism at the time of the FAA. I keep messing that up. The FAA, that it was going to harm hiring practices and they were going to be short-staffed. And here we go. They were short-staffed. And so that's one example.
Were they short-staffed? So Mason and Adam, why were they short-staffed if it's not because of...
I mean, there's many reasons for that. They've been short-staffed for a while, and Trump did not make it better by putting a hiring freeze for these agencies to hire more people. And we know that when the DC plane crash happened, the person that was running that was, I think, in charge of like two different things, a job of two different people. One person was doing it. So if you want to fix these things, maybe hire more air traffic controllers, not less. And again, I want to emphasize when we talk about, diversifying the applicant pool, like I'll just make this a more concrete example. In many cases, if you are networking and you're in certain elite circles from certain elite institutions, you automatically have a foot in the door at places like government agencies. Whereas if you are just as smart, just as capable, but you don't have those connections, you don't have that experience, you might be just as good at the job, but maybe you're not getting the same opportunities. All these programs do is allow people that don't come from the same backgrounds who still meet the same standards to now be brought into the fold. I think that's a good thing.
I mean, I would just say if people are close in requirements, I'm sure there's another way where you can specify a differentiation of who is worthy of it than the other, aside from skin color.
It wasn't
It's
skin color. It was
not like-
educational background and income background.
I'm not talking about that specifically. I'm just saying what we're seeing in generalization of DEI is they're saying two people that have the same requirements and they say, well, they have a different cultural perspective. There's plenty of other things you can detailed break that down as to who outpaces somebody else in a requirement. Nobody's going to be
Income and
so
education.
close in requirement that their skin color is going to be the separation. And I mean, I just look at, if you've watched the Super Bowl last year versus this year, you can see the vast difference in advertising. I mean, companies were dropping from DEI programs left and right because companies don't want this. If you truly look at it, so many large companies dropped the DEI programs instantly because they felt like they had this pressure under the woke administration of Biden that they had to cater to these DEI things. I mean, watching the ads this year versus last year, it's completely different. And I
Free
mean,
market.
one thing that I would talk about too is like people push for DEI. What about DEI within sports? Why don't we pushing for more Chinese players or, because sports, they actually look at the performance. And that's a perspective where you can outwardly see somebody's requirements taking place where, they don't have Chinese football players for a reason because they would not be making as much money. There would not be as much entertainment. And so when you break this down, like there's reasons why they're pushing for this agenda and they're pushing for DEI. It's just to cater to what they're trying to lead with.
Luke, I love that you're just being that open with not understanding statistical analysis, because do you think that a majority of Chinese folks in that culture are prioritizing things like playing football? Or do you think that it's more of like a cultural expectation within different communities? And that's how we get predominant members of certain communities to be in certain areas. Like it's like you're by definition showing that environmental causes or what can drive people towards certain preclusions. And that's exactly what we're trying to show, is oftentimes not only were these from the communities within themselves, but these are pushed down from the American government. There's a reason why if you go towards places that are predominantly Black communities, you're going to see more people that are Black under the poverty line than white people. Is that because Black people don't work as hard? Or is that because there are certain systemic factors that can lead those people into those communities? What would you say to that? What do you think is the cause
my perspective
of Black Americans
on that
becoming poor?
is a pretty bold perspective. And I would say Black individuals today are struggling because of the liberal agenda. They're telling you, because you're Black, you can't do this. Because you're Black, you can't reach this goal. When I was growing up, my parents taught all three of my siblings and myself, that other person is just another person. You love them, you treat them the same. They may have a different skin color than you. Who cares? You guys on the left are the ones that are saying, because they're Black, they have less opportunity. They can't do what you have the quote unquote privilege to do.
Well, I don't think either Adam or I are saying that. I think statistically we're showing that the income levels are very stark. Like, I don't know how you're disagreeing with the evidence of
when you
people.
tell a community for so long that they can never reach something because of their skin color, eventually they're going to believe it.
Nobody has once said that you can't reach something because of the color of your skin.
That's
They're identifying a problem that needs to be alleviated. Nobody, who has said that?
The systemic
I haven't
thing
taught
that
anyone that.
because of the world we live in, it's harder for you to succeed because of this,
Luke,
of that.
you gotta get your head right now out of the X mode, the X feed. You're having a conversation with us. You can ask us what we think about stuff.
But
all right, the Fox News, whatever you want to go, Infowars. You can fill in the blank with however you feel. But like, have a conversation with us right now, where you're asking us what we believe instead of saying we're telling Black people or we're going to people of color saying you can't succeed in this country. Like that is absolutely not true.
That is what the left is doing.
Mike, I haven't heard from you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting your guys' how you've characterized DEI programs. Like they're just simply saying, oh, let's consider more people from more backgrounds, as opposed to saying like, no, we specifically need to have, 50% of our employees be a minority, or something like that. Like
I've
don't
already
actually
said I opposed that in the beginning. So.
Yeah, racial quota systems don't help.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge part of DEI programs.
DEI programs are specific targeted programs that are going towards certain people. It's not like the racial quota hiring that makes it a mandate in certain industries. That's not what it is. It's allocating a certain amount of resources towards the development of certain communities. And it doesn't even go towards like all one race. It's not like there's specifically within a race. Like oftentimes these are communities where there are predominantly the same race. And the reason why they're going towards those communities is because oftentimes they've been the victims of things like redlining, things like racial policies that were specifically designed to keep people under. Nobody's advocating for like specific racial alleviation, but we're advocating for programs to alleviate intentional discriminatory laws that were passed. And obviously there are none on our own
Does
books.
redlining still exist? I mean,
Yes,
like
that's exactly what I was going to say.
definitely.
Obviously there aren't on the books now, and you can say that there's a colorblind law that we currently live under, but to pretend like generational wealth is not something that's important is to deny the reality of economic conditions.
I mean, that's a claim that you're making. So I'm going to need to see some evidence.
So you're saying there's no evidence for generational wealth disparities? That's what you're saying right now, Micah?
No, you made the claim. You have the burden of proof. So I'd like to see what your proof is for that, and then discuss that, and whether generational wealth too, whether this has a major effect overall. I'm not saying that there's not a single instance where people got ahead because of generational wealth, but most millionaires in the country today didn't inherit their wealth. They built it themselves.
Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think it's at least plausible that there exist people that are entirely qualified for these positions, but because of factors outside of their control, like the zip code they were born in, where they went to school, what they had access to, that they have a much tougher time getting certain positions in the public and private sector for no fault of their own? Is that plausible?
Is it plausible? Let's see, plausible. I don't know if I would say it's plausible. I
I
mean,
feel like it's not that
does it ever?
controversial. I don't know why we have to fight on this. Like, there's clearly people that are very smart, but because of where they live, they can't make the right connections. They don't know the right people. They don't get in these circles where, like, it's not like any merit-based person is just getting a job at the FAA. You probably need to know people in DC. You probably need to know the hiring manager. Like, these things are not, they're already not meritocracies to begin with. So if we're adding another factor into consideration to make it more fair, I think that's not a big deal.
But the question is, does DEI programs actually fix any of those problems? I mean, I'm sure if you gave... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Hey, I want to do the least amount of talking. I'm the least knowledgeable person here. I'm just the moderator, but I can't help myself. I really want to say something, which is that
Go on.
what's interesting about this particular issue is the right accuses the left of being racist for focusing too much on race. The left accuses the right for being racist for not considering what Adam is saying, which is that if you're a disadvantaged person, then of course you're disadvantaged and you should be helped out. And both
regardless of race,
and what Adam just said, Micah, you do agree with that if you're disadvantaged, if you're poor, if you have some disadvantages, it's gonna be harder to get a job wherever, the FAA and other places. And I think that, Micah, you'd also agree if there were a system such that these disadvantaged people could be given a slight boost and they're just as capable, then maybe they do deserve that job at the FAA. I think the crux of the disagreement is not on whether there are disadvantaged people and on whether those people deserve help. I think the crux of the disagreement is whether DEI oversteps and does more than just correct the differences, but says, you know what, we're going to fuck meritocracy. We're just going to put people in that role. I think Adam and Mason say that DEI is a good faith attempt to correct those disparities. And Micah, I think what you and Luke might say is that it's not. Am I correct at the crux of what that disagreement might be? And why do you think, Micah, that the DEI isn't, as Adam and Mason says, just a good attempt to right the wrong here that exists? Because some people are screwed over by their circumstance because they don't got money.
Yeah.
And how do you?
Sure. I think I agree with how you laid out the crux of the debate. The problem is, again, practically, like how these programs actually play itself out is they don't focus on your background, because if that was the case, then you also have to be including all races, all genders, and all sexual preferences within that, because there are people that are disadvantaged that are all kinds of races and skin colors and sexualities. So you'd have to include that in it, but these DI programs aren't built for that. They're made for specific people that they think are underrepresented. They're made specifically for minorities because, and they won't acknowledge if a white person, grew up poor and had a tougher background. Practically, how these play out is there's there's a quota, like we've got to get more minorities in the program, and so I'm all for a program that says, hey, let's look at people from all backgrounds, but I don't think that's what DEI is ever intended to actually do.
So I'm sure in a country of 350 million people, you can find individual DEI programs that maybe Mason and I would say like this is too heavy-handed or it's not doing a good job. The example I brought up is I think the relevant one, which is the one that Trump used to bring this into the mainstream of the FAA, in which case it wasn't really even based on race, because if you're a white person that did not have extracurriculars going up and you weren't earning money till later on in your career, that applied to you as well. Race-based discrimination is already illegal. If someone's breaking the law, then prosecute them. Sure, I have no issue with that. And again, I'd say like it really matters how we define DEI here, because this is, as Mason was saying, a very easy boogeyman to define in like the least charitable, most bad faith way possible to make a certain point. To the extent that those things exist, I don't think Mason and I are going to defend them, but I would say number one, they're good faith. So even when they're not working well, I think they are done in good faith, as Jake was saying. And then number two, I would say that I'm sure they have performance-based metrics to evaluate these things. And if it's in the private sector, I promise you, no company is going to be sacrificing millions or billions of dollars in profit to just hire Black people who are bringing down the productivity. So I do think that these are often marginal changes. And the way it typically is going to work is like they're hiring for 5 positions. They have an applicant pool of 100 people, and maybe everyone's equally qualified, and they pick the people that come from a rougher background. That's not what you're painting out to be, which is like they're looking for like stupid people that are from certain backgrounds and they're putting them in there regardless of their merit. I think it is like a lot more good faith and like a lot more complicated than that.
And I think you both demonstrated that already by showing how quick a lot of corporations were to just eliminate all of these DEI programs. It doesn't speak to the success of the programs itself, but it speaks to how malleable a lot of capitalist interests are as far as curtailing to the demands of the current administration. The fact that Trump is taking such a strong stance against DEI incentivizes companies to play ball with that administration because they don't want to be the target of any unjust government attacks. Like, why would they want the Trump administration to hamper down on their programs? They'd rather just get rid of it entirely so they don't have to go through that entire hurdle.
Well, I mean, that could easily be said for Democratic administrations too, that they implemented DEI programs.
But Democrats aren't doing it punitively against corporations that don't have DEI programs. If anything, they'll give more investment to corporations that would have DEI.
They would give more opportunities to companies that do have DEI. Is that what you said?
But that's not punitive measures like with the Trump administration. If a corporation's like, I don't want to do DEI,
well, I want to hire as many
white people as possible or whatever. But
I don't see what I don't see what punitive measures the Trump administration's taking. But again, that is an incentive for businesses to have DEI programs. So, I mean, again, same could be said for Democratic administrations. And you know what? The businesses reacting to the government that's something that's going to happen. So I don't really see how that's entirely relevant.
The relevance is just showing that this is not an example of corporations just like, phew, finally we can get rid of these DEI programs. It's them being malleable and changing to the times that they're currently under the regime of.
Well, it could be both. I mean, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And yeah, for a company to say, great, we don't have to spend a bunch of money and hire more staffers to run this DEI program now, that is equally as valid of saying, and we want to do it because, the Trump administration is in. And so now we feel the freedom to get rid of these programs because those incentives are gone.
This issue is just such a non-issue, especially when you're seeing people that are on the right. And I'm not ascribing any of these principles to the two of you, but you can scroll through X right now and see how many conservative pundits or conservative voices are calling Kendrick Lamar's performance yesterday a DEI Super Bowl halftime show. Like it's proof in the pudding that when you see a non-white person and you have the immediate thought in your mind that, oh my God, this person was put here just because they're black and not because they're one of the most successful hip hop artists of our time. Like that shows just how stupid it is to identify things as DEI hires or DEI football, DEI commercials. I'm not saying either of you two have those, but this is a perfect example about how this is used as a scare tactic, not as something that's productive.
Well, and honestly, like I can agree with you on that sometimes conservatives are way too trigger happy when it comes to DEI stuff, and they'll immediately say DEI. Like Kendrick Lamar is super successful. Like that's not DEI. That's just him being a great rapper. And so, yeah, I can totally agree with that. But at the same time, too, it's kind of like the story
but
of the
Micah,
bull.
I think,
Wait, hold on. Let me finish.
I don't want to
this
interrupt
point.
you, but I think you'd say the exact opposite for someone like Kamala Harris, right? She's a DEI candidate.
Well, no,
DEI nominee.
In that specific case, Biden came out and said that he was looking for a black woman. So that's totally different. But hold on.
Solely based on her race.
Yeah, Biden said, I'm going to choose a black woman. And so there were multiple options of people saying, oh, which black woman is he going to choose? Yes, that is an example of DEI. But even let's grant the fact that Kamala Harris may be qualified. Let me just grant that. It doesn't mean that the pick wasn't DEI in particular. And going back to the point I was trying to make, it's kind of like the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? A kid cries wolf, the whole town comes, there's no wolf, he's laughing. And that happens a couple times. And then finally, the town just doesn't come, but the wolf is actually there. In the same way, it's like when you saturate our culture with a bunch of DEI hires and programs and things like that, people are going to become so sick of it that they're going to point and say everything is DEI. Now, are they right for that? No, I don't think they're right for that. But that's part of the problem when you saturate companies and the culture with DEI is people are going to get sick of it.
I have a question on this real quick. Do you guys think, and I'm genuinely asking, that when Trump nominates people like Matt Gaetz or who's the Department of Defense guy, Pete Hegseth or RFK Jr., that these are purely merit-based hires and that's just purely based on their experience and expertise?
Well, I mean, obviously, like RFK helped him politically, and so that was a somewhat of a political favor to RFK. But also, I don't think
a meritocracy.
I mean, are you saying he's nominating them because they're white?
I'm saying they're not if you're talking about meritocracy, the idea these are the most qualified people is kind of laughable.
I would say specifically RFK, he's devoted his entire life to ending the epidemic that we're seeing within the health industry.
Would you say he's done good work on vaccine stuff? I don't want to get too deep into this, but
see, that's the point you guys always go to.
I'm asking you a question. I'm not making a point.
I would say that the shift that we've seen in vaccines is insane. When I was born, I think I got between 5 and 8 vaccines. Now a newborn baby is getting within their first year of birth, is getting between 72 and 77 vaccines. That is insane.
Why?
And I know it's a little off topic, but I do want to say the big shift that we're seeing from my parents' generation.
I have a newborn. He didn't have 70.
The shift that we're seeing from my parents' generation to our generation is, obviously technology, but a shift in diet and a shift in vaccines. And consequently, we're seeing autism numbers skyrocket. Those are the 3 big shifts we've seen throughout generations.
There's correlation. There's a correlation.
Technology and change in vaccines.
But correlation's not always causation, right?
I mean, those are 3 big shifts that we've seen.
Maybe we're just getting better at diagnosing autism as time goes on and we have better medical technology.
So that every 1 in 22 boys has autism. That's us getting better.
Would you be better at diagnosing someone than someone who actually went to medical school and trained to become a medical professional?
Well, the Red Sox have won more since 2000 than they have before that. Does that mean when the Red Sox win, we're more likely to be autistic?
Well, I'm talking about the biggest shifts in society that we've seen through children.
I'm saying correlation without evidence you can't say it's a causal relationship, right?
But what do you mean without evidence?
I just mean how do we know that they're not just correlated, right? There's 2 things can be correlated. This is such a stupid example, but the Red Sox hadn't won for a lot of years, and then since 2000 they've been winning more. But to say that that's the cause of autism, like, would obviously be a silly thing to say, just because the two.
I didn't make any claim that that's the cause.
Just
I'm
asking
making an
question.
argument that it could be.
Yeah. Okay, guys.
But
That
I
was-
mean, I just want to say one quick thing. I think Kendrick Lamar as well is very talented. I will say it's a little funny that if this was switched and we had a group of background dancers that was entirely white, the media would be going crazy. So I think, if you don't want to look at, the color of the skin, there's plenty of people from all different kinds of backgrounds, white, Asian, Mexican, that they probably were just as great at dancers as the people that we saw. So why was it that there wasn't a single other ethnicity seen in the halftime show than Black background dancers? I think that's something to think about.
Mason,
Oh.
you're on mute. I don't know if you're. Uh oh.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I said it might have been because the entire project Kendrick Lamar released that he was performing was about being a Black person in America. But yeah, who am I? Who am I to say anything?
We saw the same thing last year too. So.
No, but I think Luke's point still stands that, if it's a crowd of just white people, that the left, screams and cries about it. Because, where's the representation? Where's the DEI?
Are there examples of this? Because I'm sure there's been plenty times when there's been only white background dancers. I don't remember ever knowing or caring about this.
I mean, like every time I talk to a liberal about abortion and about Roe v. Wade, they talk about 9 white men deciding, what to do with their bodies. They bring race into it.
I'd prefer.
So
if you
there's
could talk to
absolutely,
instead of, like these
You're
people
fighting
that you're
demons
like.
out here right now. Like,
no, and honestly,
Are the liberals in the room with you right now, Mike?
well, and like honestly, like yeah, you guys sound way more reasonable than most things.
No,
most news outlets
you sound more
that I see
reasonable
out
than
there.
the liberals that are portrayed in right-wing media, and you're going to be correct in that because most people who are on the left are not those psychos. There's a reason why that they're broadcast the most on right-wing media. It's because it's an easy caricature of what left-wing ideas actually are.
I would say it's the same for the right, though.
I was about to say
Sure.
it seems very easily the same for the right. So
Although I do
if
think
you're
there's
willing to
no
acknowledge
president.
that, then that's fine. But
I do think there is like, it seems kind of like I'm on the left, so I'm going to say this, but I do think there's like a bigger problem on the right now with everything that's going on with MAGA. I don't want to go back to the beginning of the conversation, but the president just casually ignoring the Constitution, I feel like is something that the left-leaning media should be talking about and pointing out that the right is not talking about this. So,
I mean, at the end of the day, the people
not to go off
voted.
on a tangent.
So at the end of the day, majority of our country.
A majority,
Well,
49.6%.
and I mean,
But okay.
honestly,
Majority
the issue more is that the people that control the Democratic Party are more that way. Where maybe I'd agree that most liberals don't view it that way. But the people that are in control of the Democratic Party are, and they're the ones pushing this stuff.
I mean, what did you think when Kamala Harris was asked, like, how historic is this that you're a Black woman? And she's like, I don't want to talk about my race or gender. I want to talk about being good for the job. Like, it seems like, at least in her campaign, she made a very conscious effort to never bring identity into it. And then still people are calling the Democrats a DEI party when it seems like they strayed very far away from that this election.
Well, she did that intentionally, and I'm sure for political reasons, which was smart. But how she got to that position in the first place is what is in question. And it's because Joe Biden came out and said, I am going to select a Black woman.
By that standard, Joe Biden was a DEI vice president because Obama needed an old white guy on his ticket. It's like, yes, it's same way you said, it's a political calculated move to balance out the ticket. I don't know that's the same thing as DEI programs and hiring as much as just playing politics in a very big country and trying to win an election.
Yeah, but the point with that is that it appeals to the DEI sort of feelings of the Democratic Party that a lot of liberals have.
No, it happens on both sides.
And that's why it's a political move. Like that's why it's something that Biden would even do, because he's trying to win over more of the leftist base.
Every presidential ticket tries to balance the face of the ticket so that it's not too old or too this or that. Like they try to have a balance there where I think like ultimately you're making everything that tangentially involves race to be out to be DEI. When in reality, again, like, would you say that Joe Biden was a DEI pick for Obama?
If Obama came out and said, "I'm going to select a white old
Well, we
man,"
know from reporting
then that would have
like
been.
Obama was like, I need to pick an old white dude to like have more appeal in like certain areas of the
Then
country.
yeah, that's
That's
DEI,
how
and
the ticket.
that's a problem.
Is it really a
But I
problem?
mean, but you can't say every ticket has done that. I mean, look at Trump and Vance. I mean, they're both straight white males. So
There's an age thing there as well, but I mean,
And it's also a
always
demographic that
something.
specifically he wanted to add to the
Guys,
ticket. But
Final topic I want to talk about is hard pivot, immigration.
good.
Trump